What is up, YouTube? It's SpookyLoopz, and for today's video, we're going to be discussing something very different. This video is not going to be a gimmicky build showcase or a compilation of funny clips. Instead, it's about a topic that, to my surprise, affects a lot more people than I realized. And that topic is a term called killer anxiety. Now, just by hearing me say the words killer anxiety may give you one of two different reactions. One, this is something that you deal with every time you play the role, or two, this is a dumb video and DVD isn't that serious. Regardless of what your initial response may be, this problem does in fact exist, and I think deserves more attention than what some people are willing to give. Firstly, what is anxiety? Well, a brief definition is an apprehensive uneasiness or nervousness, usually over an impending or anticipated misfortune. Anxiety affects around 359 million people globally, making it one of the most common mental disorders in the world. And that's the good news. The bad news is it manifests in video games as well. So what does anxiety have to do with a game like Dead by Daylight, and particularly when playing the killer? Now, as I've recently learned over the past few months, there are so many levels to this issue, which we'll go over later, but for now, let's keep it at surface level. In the world of Dead by Daylight, killer anxiety is the stress or worry about different scenarios that can occur when simply playing the game. A bad set of chases, getting overwhelmed with your objective, or even worrying about what the other side will say based on your decisions in game. Here's a quick example. You load into a game and had a rough first chase, and upon hooking your first survivor, you see only 2 gens remaining, with a fourth already at 50%. You take a look around the map to see if the scenario is salvageable, but your last gens are spread so deep into the corners of the map, you know your patrol is going to be a nightmare. Even for a killer with mobility, this can be a daunting task. So what are you feeling when this scenario happens? Overwhelmed? Maybe even embarrassed? Or what about feeling helpless? If you've ever felt any of these things, then my friend, that is killer anxiety. Let me explain. If you played DVD for the first time without any prior experience and got rolled, you'd probably just write it off because you don't know any better. So why doesn't that mentality stick with you each time you get destroyed? It's because over time we learn what having no agency or feeling helpless can be like. And to be honest, it's fucking awful. It's such an unpleasant feeling that you dread it happening again, or simply just avoid the role altogether. As mentioned earlier, I've learned that killer anxiety has many different layers to it and isn't just limited to shit that happens in a game. For some, it's far more complex and starts right in the lobby. Sometimes the aftershock of a bad game can create pre-game stressors before you even join the queue, and a lot of that stems from the quote power roll expectation this game has. You are faster and dangerous, so anything less than that is embarrassing, right? You are fundamentally responsible for everyone's experience in the server, including yours. You don't have a teammate to carry you, and every mistake you make is on you and you alone. That's the expectation that many people have heading into a match or before they even click ready. So let's start with something simple like character selection. Depending on how some of your previous games have been, I've learned that some people avoid certain killers altogether out of fear for getting flamed for simply existing. Ghoul, Nurse, Legion, etc. And God forbid you had a bad game when using them. You had trouble piloting a strong killer and got socially shit on because they were expected to perform to a certain standard. X killer does Y better equals you should have killed everyone. And when you don't, the social impact can resonate so bad that those killers go permanently back on the shelf. So what is the alternative? For people who have this anxiety, they might exclusively pick mid to low tier killers because it accomplishes 2 things. One, if you have a shit game, you won't feel as bad because the killer is fundamentally weaker, thus the overall performance expectation is considered low, par for the course. Or 2, chances of getting shit-talked or taunted could be lower because you might be perceived as less threatening. I've been playing this game since 2019, and while writing the script, I even realized that this had an effect on me to some degree. In my case, I stare at the full roster of killers and sometimes deliberately avoid playing strong characters solely because I'm rusty and fear having a bad performance in front of an audience, let alone 4 random people in a match. So I tend to stick to my wheelhouse of comfort killers because it's easier than dealing with the disappointment of not reaching the expected result. And it doesn't stop with just character selection. The same thing goes for builds as well. Certain perks have notoriously been perceived in a negative light by the community that you may avoid them entirely. Sure, this perk provides a strong value, but is it worth having an anonymous mode survivor call me a slur for using it? Or I want to experiment with something new, but I don't want to sacrifice my sanity if I can't keep up in the game. The mental gymnastics that some players go through like this is the reason as to why they stay complacent in 2026 DVD. Sometimes it's easier to bring a knife to a gunfight than feel like shit for trying. And all of this is far worse for newer players. Oftentimes, new players are confined to a limited pool of perks and killers that force them to use the best what they have to be even remotely relevant. So they head into a game, usually under-equipped against a team they shouldn't be facing due to current skill-based matchmaking, get walked, and pray they don't get made fun of. I remember a specific instance that happened to me when I was about 1 month into playing the game. Back then I was getting destroyed every single match because I lacked gen defense, so Hex Ruin was a perk I needed to acquire. Unfortunately, earning blood points at the time wasn't great, so I decided to pick up Leatherface because Old Barbecue and Chili was a great way to farm BP. I went into the match with Tier 1 Barbecue, 2 other crap perks, and no one escapes death. A build that fit my current budget. Long story short, I got bent over the entire game, and then the last gen popped. I got my second hook because of Know It and was able to secure my one and only kill solely because saving against a chainsaw isn't easy. The game was a terrible experience for me, but what happened next was worse. A streamer and his friends tore me to shreds for using a singular perk and completely disregarded that I was getting bodied for the last 15 minutes. I still remember who you are, motherfucker. Luckily, I was able to move on from that, but for some, this is exactly how this problem is born. With that said, I think it's time to discuss the meat and potatoes, the real place that killer anxiety resides. The match itself. I understand the DBD community can be incredibly tribalistic. Survivors hate killers and killers hate survivors. This is absolutely nothing new. For me personally, I play both sides. However, I feel that some folks often forget or intentionally discount what this game requires the killer role to do because of their exclusivity or limited experience to one side. DBD is essentially a game of time, and whoever manages that time better usually wins. Since survivors can't kill killers like in other titles, it makes sense that the game is designed to put a heavier workload on the power role. So, not asking for empathy here, however, in a game of DBD, the wheels can start to fall off at any moment, and for some, it's as early as the first chase. I made a YouTube community post a few months ago when I first announced that I was going to be taking on this project. I asked people to tell me what killer anxiety meant to them, and out of the over 400 comments, I noticed one very common consistency. The feeling of losing multiple gens in your first chase feels like shit. Out of my 8,500 hours, I can confirm that is true. The reason as to why this feels so bad is because it can be perceived as a direct reflection of your skill or performance. This usually turns into frustration or embarrassment, which unfortunately can lead to helplessness. For people with killer anxiety, this is worst case scenario happening in real time. That feeling of being in an unwinnable situation. The only difference between veteran players like myself and someone that is newer is we're just able to identify it sooner. It also doesn't help that DBD does a terrible job at providing educational tools for anything outside of Hook Survivor, Kick Gen. So it's no surprise that players who invest too much time in their first engagement just get ran over. I have 1.5 generators left. A third of my perks require hook activation, and there are 14 pallets still left on the map. Since we understand that DBD is a game of time, the stress of having a ticking clock in the back of your mind for some is enough to induce actual panic. And sometimes it's hard to step back from the panic or a high-stress environment and think with a level head. It can be very overwhelming and unfortunately usually results in more mistakes occurring. Another complaint I saw were people running into squads who make griefing you their only objective. The quote bully squad is a term made very popular in the DBD community. These individuals have abandoned standard gameplay for doing everything in their power to turn you into a piñata. Continuous stuns, flashlight locker saves, sabos, the list goes on. Now the good news is most killers win the majority of these games because these teams don't actually care. But it comes at the cost of being the center point of a humiliation ritual, which leads me to my next segue. One of the things I want to drive home in on this section is most killers just don't feel threatening anymore. This is partially due to the fact that the game has evolved over time. Recent updates to pallet density, busted mechanics, and map design are massive contributing blows to killer agency. Most maps have an increased pallet spawn rate with the goal of eliminating recurring dead zones. This unfortunately means you have way more pallets to break while your target autopilots to the next one. You may have performed a great mind game only to find another filler pallet 6 feet away. More pallets opens the door to longer chases, which cranks the pressure on an already ticking clock. Pair this with somebody who already struggles with macro gameplay, and it's curtains. In recent updates, behavior has increased hook timers, anti-camp measures, longer haste and endurance on unhook alongside some incredibly strong perks. And all of these affect your agency. The longer a survivor can stay hooked, the more time survivors have to do gens. Securing a hook kill to regain control over the match now comes with a contingency. Too close and they just save themselves. Survivors on hook now have longer endurance and haste. Even if you choose to target the unhooker, more often than not, they're protected because the endurance is weaponized. What about hooking someone during endgame? If a standard 2-person save wasn't difficult enough to defend, adding in a 15-second protected survivor can turn a 1k to nothing in seconds. Finally got someone on death hook with 1 gen left? Poof, shoulder the burden, pressure evaporated. All these things can make the killer go from a monster to cotton ball and plays a huge role in killer anxiety. You might even ask yourself, well, what do I do now? The sad reality is, what can you really do? At any point in the game, if you start feeling your agency unraveling, oftentimes the best strategy is to eliminate a survivor from the match entirely. It's a lot easier to return the ball to your court when you only have 3 survivors to deal with than 4. However, this brings anxious players to yet another fork in the road. Do I tunnel someone out and risk ridicule for my actions in game, or do I play nice and put everyone's enjoyment before mine? Now, there are a decent portion of survivors, mostly the ones with experience, that understand that tunneling or this tactic is used to give the killer an edge and isn't personal. It's the other side that sees this as a cardinal sin because a standard that has been preached for 10 years says so. Everyone wants to win, however, players that have experience getting blasted for exercising something deemed off limits will avoid it altogether out of fear of scrutiny. DBD has came quite a long way from what it used to be. It went from praying your teammate actually brought borrowed time to safety nets being installed everywhere throughout the match. I know this sounds like I'm being biased, but it does feel bad for so many people when they feel like the game has prioritized one side's experience instead of both. So before you hit the comment section and say something along the lines of, quote, killers just want an easy win, I think we can all agree that survivors aren't going to die for free. I think most killer players just want to be taken seriously. For people with killer anxiety, the pressure and the stress from everything mentioned above can be everlasting, because us as humans tend to remember bad shit, in game or not. If you already struggle with emotionally responding to having a bad game, you might be one teabag away from imploding. For myself as a streamer, I get taunted often. I've learned to not physically respond to these actions, but internally, I can start to tilt. Now don't get me wrong, some teabagging or emoting and can be used to taunt you in a bad chase, but more frequently, it is used to get inside your head or to remind you that you just aren't scary. If this kind of shit happens during the start or mid portion of a game, it's probably just annoying. However, when taunting occurs after it's apparent that you've already lost, it's when some folks take it really personal. They feel like it's getting kicked when you're already down, or rubbing salt in a wound, the extra fuck you from the comfort of an exit gate. For some, this type of stuff may not bother you, but for others can feel almost telegraphed. I lost, so here comes the BM. Something I've always found so interesting about Dead by Daylight is the fact that the killer always has to stick around like they're the host at a party. Since the introduction to the abandon feature, survivors can now DC the old-fashioned way or abandon the match penalty-free if they've been downed, recovered, and downed again. This safeguard was put into place to combat slugging, however, the killer has no option to formally surrender. Sure, you could DC and hopefully close out the lobby before you catch a GG easy on the way out, but the only time the killer can abandon is when no gens have been repaired for 10 minutes. 10. That means scenarios where the last gen pops after a bad game and you just want to move on and go next, you are forced to sit and wait until everyone else decides to leave. To make matters worse, survivors don't even have to open the gate immediately. Server shutdown has a hard cutoff at 60 minutes, meaning sometimes the killer has to force endgame collapse themselves by opening the door, like a bartender ushering a bunch of drunk people out of a bar. For people with killer anxiety, it's sometimes better to stick your face in a corner than watch 4 survivors celebrate your L in an exit gate. Which leads me to our final segment of this video, the endgame. Now, I understand that this part can be a little different for players who use console, but something that gets most anxious people even more anxious is once the game is over, the actual social interaction. Every single thing that you have worried about, from sitting in the lobby to how you performed or actions you did in game to how the other side perceived you, is now all open for comment. Regardless if you win or lose, if someone wants to be an asshole, they're going to be an asshole. That's just the internet. A lot of the reasons as to why killer anxiety exists is because it's rooted directly to social interaction. One of the biggest branches in the anxiety tree is just being judged. When people have to speak in front of an audience or perform during a critical moment, the reason why they're anxious is not so much the task at hand, it's how people will perceive them if they fail. So when you play a certain way, pick a certain character, bring a certain perk, everything can be villainized depending on who you're playing against. And to people with this anxiety, these comments carry weight. You didn't deserve that win because you brought X. You played in a way I didn't like, so you should jump off a bridge. We won, but I'm still going to make you feel like shit because I can. The list goes on and on. Sometimes these social interactions is the straw that breaks the camel's back, further solidifying anxiety and creating reasons as to why you should fear this happening again. At the end of the day, if someone wants to make you feel bad, they're going to do it. Win or lose, people are just like that. It could be the most normal chill game of DBD in your life and someone will still feel the need to take a swing at you. For instance, this arena hoping my wife and I have more miscarriages because I played the twins. What you choose to let bother you is different from one person to the next, and I'm not by any means a psychologist, but if I had to guess, a lot of the reason anxiety exists in a game like DBD are due to external factors as well. Some people deal with depression, chronic stress, maybe even a shitty living environment. So when they choose to fire up a video game to take a break from that reality for a little bit, they're already pre-exposed to certain stressors. And after a while of dealing with some of the things we've discussed today, it's only a matter of time until those things start to bleed over. And that's pretty much it. I want to apologize for my delay on making this video. When I first started scripting on this topic, I originally was going to take the approach of highlighting a specific problem and then providing ways that I thought you could fix them. I realized that not only was I being dismissive about certain points, but I was also super discounting certain issues because they didn't personally bother me. So I wanted to take my time with this and research as much as I could to make sure I was bringing awareness to this problem with as much respect as possible. I reached out to my YouTube and Twitch communities for testimonies, spoke to other creators, and applied some of the things I learned from therapy. And to be honest, I was pretty surprised at all the different layers this problem has, and even more shocked how many people it actually affected. So what can be done? I'd like to see behavior implement a couple of things that can assist in making this role just a little bit more enjoyable to play. I think giving killers free corrupt intervention can help offset early match stressors while not breaking the game. Allow killers the option to surrender and go next once the last generator is completed. For someone already having a bad time, getting them into a new experience sooner than later will help overall session moods. Better new player tools for both sides when learning unfamiliar content. And this may sound like I'm sheltering, but endgame chat is just pretty useless. It's either no one uses it, some lucky instances of good sportsmanship, and the rest is just garbage. And of course, just standard balancing, but preaching to the choir there. If there's anything you can take away from this video is just remember you're not alone. I play this game for a living and I get shit on all the time. And there are so many more people out there just like you than you realize. So keep this in mind. Some people may hate a specific killer or perk or playstyle, some may not. With so many different possibilities of things that can make someone upset, it is tremendously unrealistic for you to accommodate to everyone's preferences. Try to enjoy the game you paid for. Thanks for watching.